Where you are tuned into the all-new Saturday Osmosis, all brand-new release Australian music here on 88.3 Southern FM. Now, our very special guest here this morning, Phil Manning, coming up in just a moment. What a storied career he has had so far. We're going to take a track from his self-produced, in fact, he's done everything on this album. It's called Out of My Shed, the album, and we're going to take a track from it called Heart Starts Thumping. I've played a couple of tracks. I've played 3 different tracks from the album because they're all good, and this is just another one. First time for your listening ears, and straight after that, we'll be talking to Phil Manning. Heart Starts Thumping by Phil Manning from his Out of My Shed album, just released in the last couple of weeks, and it's a fine collection of tracks, that's for sure. Now, Phil Manning, of course, a legend of Australian music. He's parlayed he's a 50-year career. Of course, famously as, probably Australia's first known and noted blues band, Chain, but in 50 years he hasn't really stopped, and he's just about as busy as he's ever been right now. He's got plenty of stuff on his plate, which we're going to talk about all of that this morning. Hey, Phil, it's a real honour to have you here. Thank you so much for coming in. I
Great
really
to be
appreciate
here
it.
On a beautiful North Brighton morning.
It is. It's beautiful. You've already had a little tour of Brighton this morning. Unintended
yes,
or not.
Unintended, yes.
But, a lot going on. A fantastic album, Out of My Shed, and
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. As I said to you just off air just now, as long as I can tap if my feet are tapping, then I'm liking it. And I tap my feet all the way through this album, and yet it's really quite a bit different and diverse. It jumps around a little bit here, there, and everywhere. There's elements of blues as there would be, but also, there's a little bit of country in there and a little bit of folk.
I've always just liked music, right?
Whatever it be.
Going right back to, those early days when I was still at primary school, and my sister used to listen to Elvis Presley and Buddy Holly and stuff like that, and I always liked that. And then, of course, the Beatles came along and the Stones, and I've always really liked good pop music.
As long as it hits the criteria of being good.
Yeah, well, who was it? I can't remember who it was. It might have been Louis Armstrong or something, said there's only 2 types of music, good music and bad music.
Pretty accurate. Pretty accurate indeed. Now, you are playing a heap of shows around at the moment. You've got a lot of things coming up, both with Chain and doing solo stuff and doing some shared shows as well.
Yeah.
Melbourne Guitar Festival coming up as well. We're going to talk about all of that stuff. Tell us a little bit about what Chain are doing. Now, Chain are, you've got to say, you're nearly in John Farnham territory for reformations and comebacks.
I mean, we can't possibly tour all the time now like we used to. No. And Matt Taylor lives in Western Australia.
Yeah, you're spread all over the country.
Drummer lives in South Australia. Dirk, the bass player, lives in northern New South Wales. I live in Melbourne. So just getting the band together in the first place is a bit of an organisational mess, But we like to get together and do it, and we get together. We obviously have to rehearse and tidy up what we may be doing. We've got an incredible backlog of material, and there's all this stuff that we've got to play, or the audience get really pissed off with us.
Yeah, but you've got a stack of new stuff too.
We have got quite a bit of new stuff, yeah, because we put out a Sweet Honey album. It's a few years ago now, but it's got a mess of material on it that we do some of that stuff. And,
sounds like you're just about ready to do another one too.
Yeah, probably are. I think we'd have to do it by text message.
Well, you can do it all by Zoom these days. People are recording albums by Zoom.
Well, people have been doing it for ages now, recording from all parts of the world.
Yeah, hey, something that Southern FM listeners have heard on multiple occasions over recent weeks has been the Arca desk recordings. And I think there's been 31 released so far, featuring people like Australian Crawl and Goanna and Red Gum and Brian Catt and all sorts of stuff. But there's a Phil Manning one, and it's from the mid-70s, 1975, and I think it's taken from a couple of shows, or is it just all from the one show?
No, it's a couple of shows. I couldn't actually. I'm pretty sure that most of it, or a large proportion of it, comes from a Dallas Brooks Hall show. I'm pretty certain of that.
It was actually a pretty good venue, the Dallas Brooks Hall. I went there for a few shows. And
they used to have mighty shows there. Yeah. I mean, that particular band actually I think it was that lineup supported B.B. King there, and I did lots of shows there. I remember I first saw Split Ends there, doing a support for them, and saw people like Taj Mahal.
Wow!
There was something on there every other week, you know.
Yeah. And of course she's long gone now. But I'll tell you what, I couldn't believe it when I found out that was just a 3-piece.
Yeah,
this recording, because you must be listening to it now. You must go, man, that's stood the test of time. It sounds great.
Well, I was honestly surprised, you know, when Ian from the Roadies Association got in touch with me and said, look, with Dave, your old sound guy who passed away sadly about a year ago or so, had all these tapes of the band, and he said we'd like to put out an album, and I immediately went, oh, bloody disc tapes! Oh no,
they'll be shy
because they're quite often just dreadful, you know. And anyway, Ian sent me a copy of them all. He gave them to me on a USB stick, and I really was dreading it. And I got home and put it on, and I went, wow, this isn't too bad.
Yeah, we're talking 1975, not 2015,
yeah.
But, you know, where technology has carried us a fair way.
Yeah, so I was really very pleasantly surprised. There were a couple of tracks that I just couldn't bear to have on where I can't remember the reason why. Either my singing was off or I made some terrible guitar mistakes. Or there were a couple of tracks, anyway, that I had to leave out. And there are also some tracks that were recorded two or three times, so they obviously came from different shows. Yeah. And with those ones, it was a matter of just picking the best, the best ones. But it came out really well, and astonishingly, there's something like 23 tracks on it.
Yeah. Including a little My Sweet Little Angel as well, which I enjoyed immensely. The old B.B. King track.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
And there's a beautiful version of that on it. But I thought the whole thing was fantastic. I couldn't believe the quality of it and how good it sounded.
No, I couldn't either. It was astounding, and I've actually thought, listening to it, that I'm pretty sure he must have done a submix somehow, because I know that if it had been just the same mix as was coming through the PA, it wouldn't have sounded anything like that.
Okay. Interesting. Of course, these days, you know, they save everything, I expect, and save everything to the desk, and it's all pretty crystal clear and lovely. But it was a great job by those guys back then.
Yes, well, back then, of course, I mean nowadays, acts tend to play a lot softer on stage because they've got used to having big PA systems. Back in the 70s, we still played really loud on stage. And so, consequently, the sound engineer probably wouldn't put the guitar player through the mix because there'd be so much guitar coming off stage. And if you got a mix like that, it would be pretty horrible on a CD. But so anyway, it turned out well.
It did, and look, check them out, folks. The Arca desk recordings. It's the Australian Road Crew Association, and there is about 31, as I say, of these performances saved for posterity, and there's some of them are just absolutely brilliant and totally worth a listen and a purchase. But now, Phil, I do want to talk about this album because I don't know how good your garden's looking, but you know, that's something that happened during COVID was everybody got their gardens looking schmick. You might not have had time, though, because you were doing all sorts of stuff. You played every part of this album. I don't know, you may have had some of the tracks written already, but wrote, produced, played all the parts, did the album art. spent more time painting, I suspect, as well. Tell us about this process, because it's a really interesting, I suspect, process that you went through with it.
Well, I had some of the material, and I sort of wrote material as it went along. But of course, once the lockdown happened for the COVID imprisonment,
yes,
it wasn't possible to go out and grab a bunch of musicians and go into a studio and do things like that. So, and I was a little bit, I wouldn't say bored, but I didn't want to do just another acoustic album. So I went out and bought myself some drum pads, electronic drum things, and I got onto Fender guitars and got them to send me a bass. And I had a sort of actually, there's a little bit of keyboard on it. You won't believe it. It cost me, I think, $10 or something.
Had a second
out on the lawn at a St Vincent de Paul sale or something.
But it did the job.
It was okay. It got by, put it that way. So I started the process, and I didn't want to get into any of the programming stuff. Number one, I'm a bit of a dinosaur when it comes to electronic stuff, and the thing that I've always loved about live music is the ebb and flow of it. The way exciting bits will tend to sort of speed up, and then there'll be a quiet bit and that'll pull back. And it's really very fractional. But you can tend to lose that when you use programs.
Definitely, because there's nothing like a musician's feel.
Well, it's human, It has its human frailties, and they come through. And so I obviously, in order to play all the parts myself, I had to have a reference. So not everything, but most of the tracks I would record with a click track. So you'd get something like that going, and then you'd put the guitar part down, and probably and often sing it at the same time. So I'd put down a track that was actually a keepable track,
yep.
And then I'd start adding to that.
Yeah, I was going to say at least 3/4 almost done.
Yeah, and start adding to that, just to make sure that I got a really good earthy feel to it.
And then I've got to say, it's very easy to go overboard with once you start tinkering with a recording, I suspect, and you didn't do that.
Well, I certainly couldn't go overboard where the drums were concerned. I was struggling enough just to play in time with it. With
some
with
nice
them,
shuffles there.
Yeah, but so I couldn't go overboard there. I've always enjoyed the simplicity of a song with simple parts, and trying to make everything actually fit in and have a reason for being there.
Yeah. And not being prettied up by whistles and bells or dancers.
No, not and like as far as guitar playing is concerned, not trying to sort of prove that I can play at 1,000,000 miles an hour or something, because I can't. But putting in really simple, effective guitar lines and that sort of thing. Yep. So I had a ball doing it, but it was quite a process.
Yeah. How long did it take all up?
Oh, look, I really lost track of time. I couldn't tell you, because some days I'd go out there in the morning and stay there till late at night,
and then blow it off for a week. And
and then I might paint for a couple of days or something.
Nice.
And other times, particularly when I was starting to do some backing vocals and patching up some vocals with it, I tended to do lots of little short things because I tend to sort of blow my voice out fairly easily.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And all that sort of stuff actually has to come into account when you're doing it all.
Yeah, yeah, but you know, I mean, some people are, you know, some acts are, you know, able to go into a studio and knock a great album out in a couple of days. You know, doesn't happen that.
No, I was going to say that's rare, but it doesn't
happen that often. But and particularly that tends to often happen with people's first albums. Because they've got a lot of
prepared. Yeah, they've been prepared for a long time.
They've been getting prepared, and then again, you know, other people spend months getting an album together.
Right.
So it can be a very varied thing. But in my case, because of the lockdown, I had all this time on my hands.
Yes, time was your friend for a change.
And I really enjoyed that actually because just simple little things like. You know, I had my guitars all, you know, put new strings on them, tuned them up, did what I wanted to do with my guitars, and then they could just sit there while I was recording, rather than having to go, all right, I've got a gig to do tomorrow, I better change the strings on that, and I better do this, and that's got to go back into its normal tuning, and you know, so I was able to sort of leave all my guitars sitting around and pick one up at will. It was great. I enjoyed that.
I'm going to ask you about your guitars in a little while, but in the meantime, can I pressure you for a track in what is going to be kind of its true form about probably how you started doing it on the album?
Yes, indeed. Yes, this is off the album, and forgive me any errors at this hour of the morning.
That's early. That's early.
Early for a musician. There are places from my younger days I can go in my mind, somewhere I can be alone, dream of another time. I'm older, so I'm told, don't count the minutes, the hours and the ways. We change to the future, that's the truth. We move away from our younger days. Snowlight hills, evenings, freezing rain, up to my knees, but I didn't feel alone. With a couple of friends on a button grass plain, trying to find our way back home. I am older, so I'm told, don't count the minutes, the hours and the ways. We change to the future, that's the truth. We move away from our younger days. These memories of the past, may they never go away. Here I go, making more today. Hay baling in a summer field, a copperhead tried to drive me away. It bit my leg, but it didn't get killed. It had no fangs in its latter days. I am older, so I'm told, don't count the minutes, the hours and the ways. We change to the future, that's the truth. Move away from our younger days. Travel wide, you travel places. Anyway, you end up somewhere. Maybe there's no destination. Maybe there's no need to care. Baby wiser, don't count the minutes, the hours and the ways we change to the future. That's the truth. We move away from our younger days. I am older, so I'm told. Don't count the minutes, the hours and the ways we change to the future. That's the truth. We move away from our younger days.
Wonderful stuff. Phil Manning live in the Southern FM studios. Absolutely wonderful. Sounded fantastic. And actually, the album does feature plenty of picking.
Yeah. Well, I've sort of become used to using thumb picks. Actually, back in the chain days, I always used a flat pick, and then bit by bit I started to do some classical exercises and learn to use my fingers a bit more, and I sort of developed the style of using a flat pick and my fingers. But when I started to seriously work solo back in the really in the late 80s, really, I started to do a lot more solo work. I had to get used to using my thumb to sort of try and keep that downward rhythm thing going, and so I've become rather dependent on these thumb picks.
To get your bass lines beautiful. Hey, just a couple of questions from the period just after that Arca recording, because the solo, or the Manning album. Two questions about that. You had just after that, you had a killer lineup at that time. Why didn't that band stay together for a longer period?
It was one of those situations that happened all the time back then, where you'd be on the road week after week after week after week, and you'd be doing 5 and 6 nights a week, travelling, hundreds, if not thousands, of miles every week. I mean, I think I worked out roughly 1 year. In one particular year, it might have been a little bit more than a year, but we'd actually done 100,000 miles on the road. That's like about 2,000 miles a week. And it just wore everyone out, and people got sick of it, and you got sick of each other's company, you got sick of the songs, and and then as well as doing the gigs, you'd have to fit in time to learn new material and rehearse, and it just burnt burnt people out.
Fair enough. So.
And that's what happened with Chain after we had Black and Blue and Judgment
days,
and that lineup with Matt Taylor only lasted 11 months. And we just burnt out. It was super burnout, and then the other aspect that happened was, even though we were working and working and working, we were not often not making very much money, and there was the management fees, the agency fees, hire vehicles, PAs, lights, road crew.
Travel,
I mean, running a band was a big deal, and at that time I had a particular management that no one that anyone would know nowadays, or certainly and they basically the end result was I ended up with a huge debt, which took me ages to pay it all back, and so all those aspects came into it, and
it's an all too familiar story.
Really, it was a pretty tough life, and nowadays there's just not the venues to do that sort of touring anymore. Which is probably a pretty good thing.
Yeah, it probably is, because the same thing would still be happening in all likelihood. And the other thing about that period was the Manning album which I have the vinyl, and it's in pretty decent nick. What an outstanding cover. Who was the young lady on the cover?
The young lady on the cover, her name was Monica, if I remember correctly. And I can't remember who it was, but some clothing store supplied the clothes for it. And so she got dressed.
What clothes?
Yeah. And so we all had our jackets and shirts and things on, and I'll never forget. This was outrageous, really. And so she came out to pose in front of the old car, for the album cover. And just being the sort of nice guy that I am, I said,
"Do you want my coat?"
I said, that dress looks great, and I meant it. I did. It looked fantastic. And she said, "I think your clothes suck."
So she made an impact in more ways than one.
Made a big impact, that girl did.
It's a spectacular photo. It's a spectacular cover. Now, you're playing a beautiful Cole Clark there, Phil. Of course, Melbourne Guitar Show coming up in about 3 weeks, 3rd and 4th, I think, of March, at the Caulfield Racecourse, where it has been for a number of years now. Don't know anyone who's been to it who hasn't had an absolute ball of a time. Tell us a little bit about how the Melbourne Guitar Show goes, and what are you doing there this year?
It's a guitar show, and it's everything to do with guitars. They have lots of retailers, lots of shops, and distributors have stands there, so that you can go along and see the latest Jackson guitar, or the latest Fender guitar, or the latest Fender amps, or whatever happens to be there. And then they have several stages, so that there's performing happening all the way through. Downstairs tends to be all the electric gear, so it's as noisy as hell.
Yeah, they can contain the sound a little bit. Yeah,
and that's where all the budding guitar players go and try things out, and you can hear "Stairway to Heaven" or "Smoke on the Water"
as many times as you
50 times a day, all played together at once. Yeah.
That's like going to a blues festival and you can hear Mojo working as many times as you want to.
And the one at the blues festival is that. You hear that on every stage. But so downstairs they have a lot of electric performers, and then there's an upstairs area that deals with acoustic instruments. And there's a stage up there where which features people that are mainly the solo artists, or the people that are sort of essentially acoustic, and that's where I'll be on Sunday, the March the 5th, with the great Nick Charles.
Oh wow!
And Nick and I played we did a duo gig at the Melbourne Blues Appreciation Society's Christmas party, and. We just went, we'll have to do that again because it was such fun.
Acoustic?
Yeah, just a couple of acoustic guitars each, and so we're doing that. And then actually tomorrow week, I'm actually doing a gig out at Oakley at the Oakley Bowls Club with Spectrum.
That's so local here. A matinee show? Matinee show afternoon.
Afternoon show. And Mike Rudd's he's doing Spectrum, and he's also going to do an indelible Mertz set as well. And I'll be there doing a solo set to support the whole thing. So.
Is that at the Oakley RSL?
I think it's the RSL.
It used to be called the Caravan Music Club.
It used to be the Caravan.
That's a great little theatre there, and it's a good stage and a great sound.
So I'll be there then, and then, as you say, it's only a couple of weeks after that, the Melbourne Guitar Show, and that, as I said, look, if you're a guitar player or you've got kids that are guitar players, you've got to go to it. It's every type of music, all sorts of guitars, just all the latest gear. It's a fantastic event, and they have food, of course. and there's a bar, which can be a very important place for many people.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, I've never heard anyone who hasn't had a whale of a time. But speaking of guitars, I know that you have a massive collection. But is there one great? I love a guitar story of where one came from. Like I found this one in. I was going through Kathmandu and I found it in a stall and paid $30 for it or whatever, or my grandfather made this guitar out of matchsticks on his deathbed or something like that. Have you got a great guitar story of one of your collections?
Well, actually, probably the most current one is, that's another thing I did when we were locked down. I've, over the years, I've developed some arthritis in my left hand. And I've lost some of my stretch, and so I've taken to playing these Cole Clark acoustics, which they were originally called the Little Ladies, but they're just known as LLs now, and they're a short scale neck, 2 inches shorter than a standard, say, Fender Stratocaster or something like that.
So shorter helps. What about width?
They're probably a little bit wider, but the width is not really a big issue in my case. It's the stretch, which this little slightly shorter neck is really great for. So I wanted to get myself a short scale electric, and I looked and looked and looked and couldn't find anything. And so I thought, bugger it, I'll make one. So I rounded up the original Telecasters. Well, when they were originally called Broadcasters, then they became known as No-Casters for a while. But they're the very original ones that were made like 1948 through to the 1950. Yeah. Were all made out of pine, and I had all this little bits of offcuts of pine around the house, and I had a big slab of Norfolk pine, and so I thought I'll make myself a guitar. So I glued all these bits of timbers together and made myself basically a slightly thicker bodied Telecaster with a Norfolk pine neck on it, and Cole Clark Guitars gave me a fingerboard off a Little Lady, so I made the whole guitar out of scraps except for the fingerboard, which meant that I've now got an electric that's got a matching neck and fingerboard stuff as my acoustics. So that's what I did. That's another thing that I did.
Dare I say it? Out of your shed.
And the silly thing about it is I've got a whole bunch of Fender guitars. And the one I've made's better than any of them. It's a terrible thing to say, isn't it? Because my Fenders are beautiful. I've got a Eric Clapton Strat I've had since 1988, and a Mexican Powerhouse one which I had from about the same time, and then a couple of other Telecasters and things. But this new little one's a real beauty. Really? It's a baby, but I love it.
Well done, yeah. We might keep going with that. Manufacturing?
No. I've done it once. That's enough.
Let's get that Cole Clark into action again with a tune, if you don't mind, Phil.
Yeah, I don't know
what have we got here?
Let me think about this. Right, I'll play a little. I'm just sort of playing around, really. I got the key to the highway, all filled up and bound to run. I'm gonna leave here running. You know walking's most too slow. Now when the moon comes over the mountain, I'll be on my way. I'm gonna walk this old highway till the break of day. I'm going down on the border where I'm better known. Yeah, you won't find me, honey, 'cause I'll be long one on my own. Now come here, mama, and help me with my heavy load. You know I'm chewing Worth, Texas. I've got to get out there on the road. I'm going down to Texas, going down behind the sun. Ask the good Lord above, have mercy, man. Evil have I done, what evil have I done? I got the key to the highway, all filled up and bound to run. I'm gonna leave here running. You know walking's most too slow. Heading down the highway, trust me, I'll be gone.
You've heard about Chelsea quality meats, but have you tried them? Exclusive providores of Glenalvie Angus, the finest free-range beef that you can buy. Why not call in and speak to Mark? He's bound to have a special deal for a Southern FM listener. Chelsea quality meats, opposite the Chelsea train station. There's easy parking at front or rear. Visit chelseameats.com.au, a proud Southern FM sponsor.
The Melbourne Welsh Male Choir presents the annual St David's Day concert at the MLC campus in Kew. The event takes place on Saturday, 25th of February at 7:30pm at the James Tattelis Auditorium at MLC's Kew campus. St David is the patron saint of Wales, and the choir will celebrate their Welsh heritage with traditional and newer Welsh anthems. Tickets are available via melbournewelshchoir.com.au/tickets.
On FM, online, 24/7. This is 88.3 Southern FM.
Yes, and we are everywhere. This is the All New Saturday Osmosis you're listening to, and for the last 35 minutes or so, we've been listening to and hearing from the great Phil Manning. And Phil, that track sounded a treat for you just noodling around, really, weren't you, hey?
Well, it's a bit early in the day to
be going hardball. Hey, stacks of shows coming up. You mentioned the Spectrum show that you're playing at Sunday week at the Oakley RSL, which will be a killer show, but doing lots of chain shows coming up too.
Yeah, well, we're getting the team together. On Friday, the 10th of March, we're doing the Memo.
Oh, wow.
Down in Ackland Street in St Kilda.
Great venue.
Then on Saturday, the 11th of March, we'll be going down to Archie's Creek.
Haven't been there yet, but all I've heard is great things about what a good vibe there is there.
Yeah, I haven't been there yet, but it's run by the same people that used to have the Caravan Club. Yeah. And it's sort of cool. It's the new Caravan Club, but it's at Archie's Creek, which is, down 5 minutes or so from Phillip Island.
Yeah, down Wonthaggi Way.
Yeah, down that way. And then on Monday afternoon, the 13th of March, because it's the Labor Day long weekend, we'll be at Way Out West.
Oh, yep.
Over at the Newport Bowls Club, and that's an afternoon gig, 2 till 5 or something like that. So,
wow, that's great.
That's chain there. The week after that, I go over to my hometown in Devonport, and I'm doing the Forth Valley Blues Festival.
Is that Tassie's only blues festival? Probably.
Well, I think it is now. They have had other ones, over the years, but the Forth Valley Blues Festival's definitely been the longest running one. It's I think. And then on Easter weekend, so that's the 7th and 8th of April, Chain are going to be up at Byron Bay. And then on Sunday, the 9th of April, we're coming back down to Melbourne for the Melbourne Blues Fest.
Which is a cheat. After we bought our tickets for Byron Bay, then they announced a Melbourne one. So we'll definitely see you up at Byron Bay, Phil. Really excited about that. Actually, speaking of that, Now, so how many shows are you doing at Byron Bay?
We're doing a Friday and Saturday at Byron, and then the Sunday in Melbourne. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Anyone you've seen the lineup for Byron Bay?
Yeah.
Any unknowns that we should be looking out for to go and see that you've noted?
Look, to tell you the truth, I haven't really sort of gone through it, and you know, I mean, there's some sort of obvious ones. You know, when I say obvious ones, is people like if you haven't seen Tash Sultana.
Yes, Tash is a good local girl from around here.
She's something else, really.
Yeah,
doing all her looping stuff and all that. But you know, being the age that I am, the ones that really interest me, obviously Buddy Guy.
Yes,
I have loved Buddy Guy as a guitar player since. I was probably first heard him when I was about 17 or 18, and I've always loved him. He's been my favourite electric guitar player.
And this is his last time out here, they reckon.
Yeah. And
he's been here many times, but
yeah, I saw him a few times back in the 70s, and then I saw him in the 90s, I think it was, at Byron Bay. In fact, I ended up. I wasn't on the show. Matt Taylor was actually part of that show, and I went along to. So I ended up spending about half an hour talking to Buddy in the dressing room. That was lovely, lovely fellow. And of course, when I mentioned that I'd toured with Muddy Waters a couple of times. And Buddy said, "Oh, you come and sit down here and talk to me," you know, because he was just the biggest fan of Muddy, because Muddy sort of saved his ass, really. He gave him his foot, you know, basically took him off the street, you know. And
that I didn't know.
I was looking at a thing on Buddy Guy, a documentary the other day where he said just that. So Buddy Guy is obviously someone that I really want to see. And then there's the obvious, you know, Lucinda Williams. I'd like to see her. I'd like to see Jackson Brown. You know, so when it comes to the new younger artists, I haven't really taken that much notice yet. And
there's sure to be some treats, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, there always are. I mean, I've done Blues Fest, I don't know how many times now, probably 15 or 16 times.
In various guises, and this is probably about the 6th or 7th go-around with Jane, probably.
And there's always been something that's, you know, blown my mind.
Yeah.
There's always been, and there's always been lovely things that have happened, you know. And I remember that one of the biggest surprises I ever had was seeing John Hammond go on stage on one of the main stages, the really huge big tops, and went on stage with an acoustic guitar without a pickup. So he just put a microphone in front of his acoustic guitar,
like we're doing here,
and entertained this, you know, couple of thousand people in this huge tent with an acoustic guitar, and it was mind-bogglingly good.
They would have been spellbinding.
It was just incredible.
Of course, his albums sort of came across that way too. He didn't over technicalise his albums either. They were pretty straight up, weren't they?
Yeah.
So I need to get my record player fixed so I can start playing some of those old vinyls, because I've got a few John Hammonds in the collection that I haven't heard for 20 years.
I'm the same. I've even got a near mint condition album of the John Mayall, Eric Clapton Beano comic album, and it's a wonderful album, that one. That was one of my big influences. Talking of albums, I should tell everyone
about yours
that if you want to get a hold of mine, you either have to come to one of my gigs, or you can hop on my website, which is just philmanning.com.au, and there's a little bunch of guitar picks down one side of the home page, and one of them's got "buy" on it, and you just click on that, and it takes you to my page of CDs. And that's where you'll find my new album, Out of My... It was actually... It was a funny thing, because I was going to call it Out of My Head.
Yes.
Just to be silly, that's because of the days that we used to smoke dope and drop acid and do those terrible things.
And as we get older, Phil,
I was... and then I thought, no, I'm recording it in my shed. I'll call it out. So I actually wrote down Out of My Head, and then I crossed it out and put shed. I thought, I actually like the way that looks. Yeah. So I put that on the album cover.
Hey, pick us a track off the album for us to play out with.
Oh, okay. Well, how about track number 1?
Yes, you bet.
Yes, you bet.
Okay, let's...
Or track number 2.
It's looking right. No, I can play number 1. I'll just bang it in the old-fashioned way and whack it in the CD player, and away we'll go.
Goodness.
That's hardcore, going back to the old CD player. I don't use these too much these days, but got to thank you too, Phil, for actually sending it through. It's been keeping me great company in the car over recent weeks. And again, thank you so much for actually coming across from the other side of town.
Great pleasure.
The pleasure and honour has been definitely mine. The album is Out of My Shed by Phil Manning, and believe it or not, Phil Manning, pretty easy to find on social media too. And if you go to the link that's on the Southern FM Facebook page, you'll be able to go and purchase his album. And it is a beauty. It's I think there's 13 tracks, yep, and there's there's an element of blues, and there's an element of folk, and an element of country, and there's a little bit of everything in there, and it's a really neat album, Phil. Well done.
Thank you.
And thanks again for coming over. This is the opener, the album opener. Yes, You Bet, from Phil Manning. The great Phil Manning, and Yes, You Bet, from his album Out of My Shed. And it really is, it's a beaut album. It jumps around all over the place. There's little bits of country and little bits of blues, and it's a really, really fine album. And it's been a real honour to have Phil in the Southern FM studios today, and we thank him greatly.